This video is sponsored by Rockler. This is my first time getting lumber directly from Rockler's website. I got some 3/4 inch thick white oak, and I am really interested to see what we got and how good the quality is. So let's take a look. So straight out of the box, these boards are exactly the dimensions that they advertise online. And all four sides are surfaced nice and clean with two perpendicular edges. And there's just a slight bolt down the middle. And I'm pretty sure once I get these cut down to length, it's gonna be barely noticeable. So this is gonna save me a ton of time. Yeah, I'm gonna get these guys cut. And some of these pieces are gonna be edge glued together to make the top. And some are gonna be face glued together to make the thicker stock for the stretchers, since I think the thickest stock that they sell online is 3/4 of an inch. So yeah, let's get this project kicked off. Alright, so I got everything clamped up, and if you haven't seen these before, these are Rockler's Deluxe panel clamps. And what's so cool about these is that they not only squeeze the boards together, but they also apply this vertical pressure to help keep the faces aligned so that the panel is going to come out nice and flat, which is great because these boards are already exactly 3¼ inch thick. So I really don't want to have to take off more material if there's any bowing or misalignment during the glue up. Sorry I digress, guys. I just thought this is really cool. Let's start working on the legs now, and to help me explain some of this stuff, let's take a look at the model. So my plan is to make these tapered pieces first, and then we're gonna come back and use those as reference to cut this vertical piece to size. And obviously these two are different. One is longer than the other, but more importantly, they're actually angled in opposite directions. So if I take this one and we shift it down, and then let's rotate that 180 degrees. Let's go to the right view, and you can see that they're angled in opposite directions. But we can actually make these angles by setting up our crosscut sled only once. Now let's take a look at the bottom piece first. Here I model what each step is going to look like. So the blue piece represents the stock that we're starting out with, and then the yellow pieces are the final parts. And this is just to help us to visualize where the final parts are in relation to the initial stock as we move through these steps. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our crosscut sled to 7 degrees like this. And we're going to make one pass to cut off one of these ends. And then we're going to rotate this workpiece 180 degrees. So basically I'm just taking this workpiece and just rotating it like that. And then we're going to put it back on the crosscut sled and make another pass to cut this part to its final length, which I believe is 17 inches for these lower parts. And then we're going to lay out a taper that goes from 2½ inches down to 1 inch. And we're going to use this line to set up our tapering jig. And we're going to take one pass to cut out one of these pieces. And then we're going to take this offcut here, spin it around 180 degrees. And then we're going to take a second pass to cut out the second piece. And that's it. Now let me show you what that's going to look like for the top piece. As I said earlier, there's absolutely no changes to the crosscut sled, and these two cuts are exactly the same as before. The only difference is the length of the part. But the difference is how we're going to lay out the taper. So on the previous parts, the 2½ inches was on the side with this acute angle. But for these, the 2½ inches will be placed on the side with the obtuse angle. And then once again, it's just going to taper down to 1 inch, and then we're going to use that line to set up our tapering jig and finally finally cut these two pieces out. Yeah, sorry I talked a lot, but let's get these tapers cut so we can start on the rest of the legs and put on jacket. Okay, so these guys are done, and now we're ready to move on to the vertical pieces, which I've already ripped down to their final width. So now we just need to figure out the angles that we need to cut on the ends here, and it's actually really easy to do. So the first thing and most important thing is to make sure that these horizontal pieces are oriented correctly. So this bottom one should have an acute angle on this bottom front corner here, and then this top one should have an obtuse angle on this top front corner. So if we put the vertical piece on top and then we flush out the front surfaces, it should look something like this, where the top edge and bottom edges are parallel and the whole thing leans back 7 degrees. So once that looks right, I'm gonna take my bevel gauge and I'm gonna set it to the angle of this top edge on the bottom part, and then let's lock that down. So now I'm gonna transfer this angle onto the vertical piece like this. Okay, now we're gonna do the same thing on this top part, but this time we're gonna reference off of this bottom edge instead. So let's turn that around and let's take that reference. But before we transfer this to the other end of the vertical piece, I'm gonna make a measurement from our previous layout line to 19.5 inches. And that's where we're gonna start marking our second angle, like this. And there we go. So I'm gonna set up my crosscut sled to one of these lines. I'm gonna make the same cut on both parts. And I'm gonna set up the crosscut sled again to cut off the other end. And once we have both pieces cut, I'm gonna use glue and dowels to join all of these parts together, using this 3/8 inch dowel jig to cut those mortises for those dowels. So yeah, let's do this. This is gonna be so painful if I kick it. So I'm gonna clamp this to my miter gauge and I'm gonna cut a chamfer on the ends here, and probably gonna cut one over here too just to make it look pretty, and then take this whole thing over to my router table and round over all the edges. Alright, so there's a bunch of different ways for us to go about attaching the legs to these stretchers, and the simplest being to just keep using our dowels. But Rockler gave me these heavy-duty cross dowels and this jig that's designed for installing them, and I really wanted to try these out for this project and see if it's something that I want to use in the future for larger projects. And to use these, the most important step is to accurately lay out where we need to drill the holes in these parts. So on the stretchers, we're going to start by laying out the center point on the ends here. So the dimensions here are 1.5 inches by 1 3/4 of an inch. So our center point is going to be 3/4 of an inch from the sides, and then 7/8 of an inch from the top and bottom. And this is the center point where we will drill the 9/16 inch hole for this 1/2 inch bolt to go through. Now, to figure out where to drill the 7/8 inch hole for the cross dowel, we're going to first extend this center line onto this face, and we're going to do that using a square like this. And then to determine how far the cross dowel needs to sit from the end, we're going to subtract the thickness of the leg from 4 3/4 inches. And this 4 3/4 inches ensures that the bolt is going to extend 3 threads past this cross dowel. Now, since the thickness of our leg is 3/4 of an inch thick, that vertical center line is going to be at 4 inches from the end. And let's take a square, and we're going to extend these center lines so that they cross each other, like that. Okay, now let's take a look at the legs. So we know these stretchers are going to sit centered on these legs from the front and back edges. These legs are 2 1/4 inches wide, which means that this vertical center line is going to be at 1 1/8 of an inch from the front and back edges. And the bottom stretcher is going to sit 3.5 inches from the ground, and this thing is 1 3/4 inches tall. That means this horizontal center line is going to be 4 3/4 of an inch from this bottom edge. And the top stretcher is going to sit flush to the top surface of the legs, which means the horizontal center line is going to be 7/8 of an inch from this top edge. Okay, so that is everything that we need to lay out, and of course we need to do the same thing for all these parts, but we are ready to start drilling some holes. Now, this jig comes with 2 bushings. One is for a 9/16 inch drill bit that's gonna make the holes in the legs and the ends of the stretchers for the bolts to slide into. And this other one is for a 7/8 Forstner bit that's going to make the holes for the cross dowels. So to use this jig, it's pretty straightforward. We just line up these marks on the jig with those lines that we laid out on the work pieces, and then we mount the correct bushing into the jig depending on which holes we're drilling and drill the holes. So yeah, let's finish laying out the lines on the rest of the work pieces, and then we're going to drill some holes and get these legs assembled. So I was super excited to see how well everything was going to fit together that I forgot about these sharp edges. So I'm going to disassemble everything and then take these over to my router table to round over these edges. And then we're going to also cut some recesses along these top surfaces so that we can use figure-8 clips to attach the top panel. And lastly, we're going to sand everything down, spray on some finish, and then we're going to put everything back together. finding ways to improve how I work from home never gets old. And one thing I love about this project was just how quick and easy it was to make, especially since I didn't have to do any milling. So I definitely think this is a perfect weekend project for DIYers out there. Now, one mistake I made, well, it's not really a mistake, but if you're gonna use cross dowels and bolts like I did, make sure that the 9/16 inch drill bit is long enough because the jig reduced the actual cutting length of this bit. So what I had to do was drill using the jig and then take the jig off and then continue drilling using the hole from the first pass as sort of a guide, which, I mean, it worked out pretty well, but it could have been much easier if I just used a longer bit. But anyway, I'm really happy with the way this turned out, and I actually don't mind the exposed hardware as much as I thought I would. I think it actually looks kind of cool with the contrast, but if that's not your thing, you can also use dowels to join the legs and the stretchers, which honestly would have probably made this project even easier to do. Anyway, thanks to Rockler for sponsoring this project, and there's gonna be free plans on their website, so be sure to check that out. And thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.